Things to look out for are like whenever you first read it, you want to carefully read it. You don't really want to make any changes to it. And then after you've done that, you want to go back. You want to look for simple things like spelling and grammar. The one thing that I don't like is fluff, but you always want your writer to say what they have to say, and then because you can always cut it down, but you can never add to it. So yeah, just fluffing is no good. In sports, it's kind of difficult because the vocabulary. Like I know one of the writers last year kept saying like the Lady Eagles, and it got really repetitive. However, there's not that many things that I would be able to use like that would make sense. Like I can't substitute like the women's basketball team for. But in other sections, you can look for words that are similar meaning, even though they're different words, so they don't seem repetitive. Yeah, and then you always want to back up your claims. Like I know in sports, like if someone's going to make an argument that so-and-so is the best pitcher in the league, like they're going to need statistics to prove that. As in like, if it was arts and entertainment, like if they were like, oh, this is a great movie, then you can't just like say, oh, it's a great movie. Like you need something to back up what you're saying.
So, and then what I did for the rest of this presentation is just kind of go through how I edit things, and I'm only doing this because most of you are new editors. I'm going to do this with the more seasoned staff. And this is just, I didn't like sit down at the beginning of last semester and say, this is how I'm going to edit. It's kind of stuff that developed with me, and I found myself in this routine of editing. And it's, I mean, there's always exceptions, but this is what I did for most of this stuff, and it worked. So I'll just go through this real quick. So when I get the rough draft, I read it over just to read it, kind of as a courtesy, just to get a feel for it also. And then any blatant mechanical errors, sometimes I get things where there's like the red underline, and I'm like, oh, how'd you miss that? And I fix it, and other stuff. I see Johnny talked about fluff, and yes, some of it's important. For me, especially in opinions, a lot of times in the introduction, there's a lot of build-up, and the introduction itself would be like 200 words, and we have like space issues already, and it's not interesting or necessary for the argument, but of course it's an introduction, and I do that too, we all do that. So that's kind of where I like make the most changes, is the introduction. That's where the most fluff is. So I'll say, oh, you can cut 3 sentences here, maybe you should try that, and we'll see if that gets done and if it works. And then, especially for opinions, but probably for other stuff too, I found a lot of times to make an article go from rough draft to second or final draft is to just take what's already there and move it around. It's big with arguments, like, oh, I'll say, oh, your introduction sounds like it could really be a second paragraph and maybe you should do a new introduction, or oh, why don't you flip paragraphs 2 and 3? And it's sometimes hard to see when you're writing it yourself, and that's why we have editors. And that's a lot of, rather than just telling the writer, oh, this isn't great, I think you should rewrite parts of it, it's just taking what's already there and moving it around. And I'm sure that's true for other sections too. I just don't have experience in that. But that can really, it's like kind of a quick fix, and it's not a ton of work, yeah. And then I send it back, and that's the rough draft. And then a lot of these changes will be made in the second draft. So that's when I fix the mechanical errors that aren't just stuff that like Microsoft Word has highlighted for me. It's when I look at sentence structure, maybe poor word choice or using incorrect terms. It's a little bit more in depth. And then also we talked about vocab variation, and it's probably most challenging to have that in sports and maybe even news, because that's where you're dealing with like lots of names and technical terminology. But in other sections, you know, sometimes when you write, you just get one word stuck in your head and you just keep writing that over and over like subconsciously, and then you go back and read it and you're like, wow, I used the phrase lamp 36 times, maybe I could use light instead. That's what I'm really big into good variation of words. So unless it's like a technical term that there's no substitution for, I'm really picky. I'll say like you should only use certain words once per paragraph or article. So that's when I pay close attention to that. And in like Microsoft Word, you can even look up the word in what you've written and just type it in, and it'll show you everywhere you used it, and that's a good way. I do it for my own writing if I suspect that I've used terms too many times. I'll look it up and I'll try to change it where I can. And then I send it back, and then it's final draft time, and that's just last minute stuff. By then it's usually the easiest, just picking up the pieces that might have fallen through the cracks during the rest of it. Or I guess if other suggestions that I made weren't taken, and they're important to me, I'll change them. And I often will, if I make changes to the final draft, which I usually do, and they're usually small, I'll send it back and say, so the writer can see it. And that's usually just like a courtesy for them. Like, this is what we're publishing. It's slightly different than what you said. I changed the fourth word in the second paragraph. But if it was really important to you to have it, just let me know by Sunday night or whatever, so that I can go back and fix it. A lot of times I'll make suggestions and people will accept them. Sometimes I'll just ignore them and I'll keep making the suggestions because I think they're good, and they just keep ignoring them, and that's frustrating. Sometimes I will make a suggestion and this is good, and then the writer says, well, yes, but also this, and they'll provide their reasons for why they had it the way they did. And when that happens, it's, oh, I misread that, or I didn't understand it, or I don't understand this concept as well as you do, and that's why I'm not writing the piece. That's why you are. And that's great when a writer can give me the reasons for why they did something, and I understand it better, because then I'm learning too. And it's good to give reasons for why you're doing things. And then it feels like it's their piece and not just my additions and stuff. I think that's it. Any questions? I guess since a lot of you are new writers. Again, this is just my process, and it's probably very much catered to the opinion section.
I guess something, if you're writing for the news section, or even A and feature, well, any section really, is just to do like a quick fact check if people are, citing facts, especially if you haven't heard of it before, you're not sure, just to double check.
Yeah, I guess I don't do that a ton because it's usually more opinion, but for other sections, certainly that's probably very important. Name spellings too, I guess, would be something. Again, I don't get a ton of names in my articles, but especially if it's someone who's like on campus, like you don't want a faculty member picking up the Waltonian and reading what they said and then seeing their name misspelled. That's something that I guess editors would want to check.
Awesome. Thank you.